The Star-Forged Lover. There was a village at the edge of the world, a place where the cobblestones were worn smooth by generations of feet and the thatched roofs wore heavy white blankets of snow. It was a village that knew its place, which was to be precisely where the solid, sensible world of baking bread and mending fences began to fray at the edges, letting in the whispers and the wonders. On one side, the deep, dark woods, older than sorrow. On the other, the rolling hills that eventually forgot the village's name. And above it all, the sky, a vast, ink-washed canvas on which the stars were scattered like diamond dust. This is a story about that sky, and what was stolen from it. It begins, as the best and worst of stories often do, on the night before Midwinter. A night when the air is so cold it snaps, and the breath of every man, woman, and beast hangs in the air like a ghostly promise. A night when the barrier between what is real and what is imagined becomes as thin and fragile as a pane of ice on a water bucket. And on this particular Midwinter's Eve, the barrier broke. His name was Nyxar, and he was a demon of a particular and petty variety. He was not the sort to command legions or orchestrate the fall of kingdoms. No, Nyxar's pleasures were smaller, more intricate. A missed stitch in a tapestry of fate, a dropped coin that rolls into a drain, a perfectly timed hiccup during a marriage proposal. He was a creature of the cold spaces between stars, a trickster who wore the night like a velvet cloak. And on this evening, he was in a foul mood. The source of his displeasure was the village blacksmith, a young man named Corvin. Corvin was, by all accounts, a good man. Strong, quiet, with hands that could gentle a spooked horse or forge a sword that sang when it was drawn. But Corvin had a secret, one he himself did not fully understand. There was a trace of starlight in his blood, a legacy from some forgotten ancestor who had danced with a celestial being. It was this starlight that let him fold enchantments into the metal he worked, a horseshoe that never needed replacing, a latch that kept out more than just the wind, a locket that held a memory as fresh as the day it was made. And Corvin, the fool, had used this gift to paint a most offensive picture. On the wall of the village church, a sturdy little building that stood as a bastion against the creeping dark, Corvin had painted a fresco. It depicted the banishment of the demons of the air, and there, in the corner, being soundly thwacked by an irritated-looking archangel, was a figure of remarkable resemblance to Nyxar. The demon's expression was one of comic surprise and profound indignity. Nyxar had seen it. And he did not appreciate the likeness. "Very well, Smith," Nyxar hissed, his voice the sound of coal shifting in a dead fire. "You wish to mock the night? Then let us see how you fare without its greatest jewel." He stretched out a long, slender hand, fingers tipped with nails like shards of obsidian. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not summon a storm. Instead, he reached for the moon. It hung in the sky, a perfect, luminous pearl, bathing the snowy village in a light that was both silver and blue. It was the lamp of the world, the guide for lost travelers, the confidant of lovers. Nyxar plucked it from the sky as easily as you or I might pluck an apple from a branch. He did not destroy it. That would be crude. He simply pocketed it. He tucked the moon into a fold of his cloak woven from the void between worlds. Instantly, the world changed. The silver-blue light vanished, replaced by a profound and immediate darkness, a blackness that felt thick and heavy. But it was not a simple absence of light. Oh no! This was a magical darkness, a living thing. The familiar constellations, which should have blazed all the brighter, seemed to waver and dim, as if a veil had been drawn across the heavens. The snow, which had sparkled, now lay dull and menacing. The shadows ceased to be mere absences of light and became things with substance and intent. They pooled in the lanes, they slithered up the walls, they whispered secrets that were best left unheard. This was Nyxar's chaos. Not fire and brimstone, but a profound disorientation. A world unmoored from its celestial guide. In the heart of the village, in a cottage that seemed to lean against its neighbors for support, lived Morwenna. She was a woman of a certain age, which is to say an age that was nobody's business but her own. Her hair was the color of crow's wings, and her eyes missed nothing. She was Corvin's mother, though she showed him little more affection than she might a particularly useful household pest. Morwenna was a witch, of the practical, village variety. She could cure a wart, charm a wayward cow, and, on occasion, help a young woman see the face of her future husband in a bowl of water. For a price. She also had a sideline in companionship. Several of the village's more prominent, and less nimble-minded, men found their way to her door on lonely nights, their pockets heavy with coin or promises. When the moon vanished, Morwenna was stirring a pot of something that bubbled and hissed over her hearth. She did not startle. She simply looked up, a slow smile spreading across her face. Chaos was good for business. Fear made men foolish, and foolish men were generous men. Well now, she murmured to her cat, a creature with one eye and the demeanor of a retired assassin. It seems the night has become interesting. The cat flicked its tail, unimpressed. Meanwhile, in a house that was neater and brighter than most, a young woman named Selena stood by her window. She had felt the moon disappear before she saw it. A coldness in her chest, a sudden loneliness. Selena's beauty was the talk of 3 villages. Her hair was the pale gold of winter sunlight, and her eyes held the deep, mysterious gray of a twilight sky. But her beauty was not merely a matter of features. There was a light in her, a cool, calm radiance that seemed to come from within. The old women said she was moon-touched, and they were closer to the truth than they knew. She felt the moon's absence like a physical ache. A part of her was missing. Outside, the village was descending into a state of charming, folkloric panic. Tomas the miller, who had been weaving a path home from the tavern, found his way suddenly blocked by a shadow that had taken the shape of his formidable wife, Brina, brandishing a rolling pin. He promptly turned and fled in the opposite direction, straight into a snowdrift. Elric the woodcarver, a man of a nervous disposition, saw the leafless branches of the trees as skeletal fingers reaching for him and began a high-pitched negotiation with what he believed to be a forest spirit, offering it a slightly dented tobacco pouch. And in his forge, Corvin looked up from the piece of metal he was annealing. The fire was the only real light now, a heart of crimson and orange in the swallowing dark. He walked to the wide doorway and looked up at the star-dusted, moonless sky. A prickle of unease, the same feeling he got when a piece of metal was about to cool incorrectly, ran down his spine. This was wrong. This was a flaw in the great design of the world. His thoughts, as they so often did, turned to Selena. Was she afraid? The thought of her, frightened in the unnatural dark, was a physical pain in his chest, sharper than any burn he'd ever suffered. He loved her with the hopeless, aching fervor of a man who believes the object of his affection is as distant and untouchable as one of those dim stars. He, a simple blacksmith, whose hands were stained with soot and scarred by sparks. And she, Selena, who seemed woven from moonlight and dream stuff. He had tried to show her his heart in the only way he knew how. He had forged for her a rose from the finest silver, each petal so thin it was nearly transparent, its stem twisted with delicate thorns. It had taken him a month of secret work, and in its heart, he had placed a tiny, captured gleam of starlight, so it would glow softly in the dark. It was a masterpiece. He had given it to her that morning, his hands trembling, his tongue a clumsy lump of clay. Selena had taken it. She had turned it over in her slender fingers, her expression unreadable. Then she had laughed. It was not a cruel laugh, but it was a light, teasing one, the sound of ice crystals chiming together. "It's very pretty, Corvin," she had said. "Truly. You are a wonder with your metals. But any man can make a pretty thing. Even Lord Varric's simpering son could buy me a dozen silver roses from the capital." Corvin's heart had sunk to the soles of his heavy boots. "What would you have, then?" he had asked, his voice low. A mischievous, capricious light had sparked in her gray eyes. The moon-touched part of her, the part that was never quite satisfied with the earthly realm. "They say," she began, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "that the Queen of the Stars herself has a pair of boots. Not boots for walking in mud or snow, oh no. They are woven from the fabric of the twilight, sold with the silence of a falling star, and buckled with 2 chips of the first morning. They say that when she wears them, she can dance on the rings of Saturn and wade through the Milky Way." She looked at him, a challenge in her gaze. "Bring me those boots, Corvin. Then I will know your love is as vast as the sky, and not just as deep as your forge." It was an impossible request. The punchline to a celestial joke. He had walked away, the silver rose feeling like a lump of lead in his pocket. Now, standing in the moonless dark, the memory of her words echoed in his mind. An impossible request. But the world had just become a place of impossibilities. The moon was gone. Shadows were alive. Perhaps, just perhaps, the path to the Queen of the Stars was open tonight. He made a decision. It was not a wise decision, nor a safe one. It was the kind of decision that gets men lost in woods that are not on any map, or turned into small, decorative ornaments by disgruntled fairies. But it was a decision made of love and desperation and a trace of starlight. He would find the boots. He did not know that his mother, Morwenna, was at that very moment opening her door to a parade of bewildered and amorous villagers, each hoping to find solace from the strange night in her company. He did not know that the demon Nyxar, pleased with his handiwork, was swooping down towards the village, intending to make Corvin's life particularly miserable. He only knew that the world was broken, and the only thing that felt solid and true was his love for a girl who asked for the moon. Or, failing that, its footwear. And in the deep, star-dusted darkness, a journey was beginning. If you were to ask the good people of the village, the ones not currently arguing with a personified shadow or offering tribute to a suspiciously shaped hedge, what they thought of Morwenna, you would get a variety of answers, all whispered. Brina, the miller's wife, would say, she knows things she shouldn't. And her pickles are unnaturally good. Tomas, the miller, if you were sufficiently sober and out of earshot of Brina, might blush and mutter something about her having a comforting manner. The children believed she could turn into a cat, a hare, or a wisp of smoke depending on her mood, and they were not entirely wrong. Morwenna's cottage was a living entity, its timbers groaning with secrets, its windows peering out like knowing eyes. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of drying herbs, wood smoke, and something else, something like ozone after a lightning strike. On this moonless midwinter's eve, her home had become a sanctuary of a sort, lit by a single, guttering tallow candle that cast long, dancing shadows of its own, shadows that did not always match the objects they were tethered to. Her first visitor was Elric the woodcarver, a man whose nerves were as frayed as an old rope. He burst through her door, his face pale, a dusting of snow on his shoulders like a ghostly epaulet. Morwenna. The night has teeth, he gasped, clutching his chest. The trees, they reached for me. I saw their bony fingers. Morwenna was seated in a high-backed chair, mending a stocking. She did not look up. Elric, the only thing the trees want from you is for you to stop blundering into them after dark. You're scaring the squirrels. What did you bring me? Elric fumbled in his pouch and produced a small, beautifully carved badger, its expression one of stoic determination. A guardian spirit, he stammered. For protection. Morwenna took the badger, examined it, and gave a noncommittal grunt. It'll do. Sit by the fire and stop trembling. You're rattling my pots. No sooner had Elric settled onto a stool than there came another knock, this one more of a confident thud. It was the village headman, a portly fellow named Havel, whose dignity was often at war with his appetites. He swept in, brushing snow from his fine woolen coat. Morwenna, a word, he boomed, then noticed Elric cowering by the hearth. Elric. Shouldn't you be carving something? The trees, headman. The trees. Elric whimpered. Havel ignored him, turning back to Morwenna. This unnatural darkness. It's bad for morale. The villagers are jumpy. Some of the women are talking about forming a committee. I need you to do something about it. A charm. A potion. Something to brighten the mood. He leaned in conspiratorially. I have a cask of that apple brandy you're so fond of. Morwenna finally looked up, a sly smile playing on her lips. The entire cask. For a proper result, Havel said, puffing out his chest. The cask is a start, she said. But the night has its own mind, headman. I can't put the moon back in its socket like a false tooth. But I can perhaps make the dark a little less attentive. Leave the brandy by the door. As Havel departed, looking relieved, a third figure slipped inside, moving with a silence that was unsettling in a man of his size. This was Borville, the village baker, a widower with a heart as soft as his day-old bread and a hopeless, mooncalf affection for Morwenna that had survived decades of her gentle mockery. He held out a loaf of bread, still warm from his oven, its crust golden and perfect. "For you, Morwenna," he said, his voice a gentle rumble. "In case the excitement makes you peckish." This time, Morwenna's smile held a trace of genuine warmth. "You're a good man, Borville. Too good for this world, and certainly too good for me. Sit. Keep Elric company. He's afraid of the furniture." And so her little cottage filled with the sounds of male anxiety and the scent of warm bread. Morwenna moved among them, pouring cups of a sharp, fragrant tea, her mind working faster than her hands. This was all very amusing, but she knew this was no ordinary squall. This was a crafted darkness. And she had a fair idea of who had crafted it. Her thoughts were interrupted by a sudden, violent gust of wind that blew the door open, extinguishing the candle and plunging the room into a blackness so complete it felt solid. Elric shrieked. Havel yelped. Borville simply said, "Oh dear." But Morwenna stood still. She could feel a presence in the doorway, a cold that had nothing to do with the winter air. A voice, smooth as oiled leather and cold as a grave, slithered through the dark. What a charming gathering! A parliament of fools. A hand snapped its fingers. Not loudly, but with a finality that seemed to crack the air. A ball of sickly green light, the color of a bruise, appeared, hovering above the palm of Nyxar, the demon. He stood in the doorway, his form seeming to drink the little light there was. His smile was a sharp, white slash in the gloom. The villagers froze, their faces masks of terror. They were simple men, their fears usually confined to poor harvests and their wives' tempers. A demon was well outside their experience. "Run along, little morsels," Nyxar purred. "The witch and I have business." They did not need to be told twice. Elric, Havel, and Borville scrambled for the door, squeezing past the demon with a haste that was undignified but entirely sensible. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving Morwenna alone with the thief of the moon. "Nyxar," Morwenna said, her voice steady as she relit the candle with a touch of her finger. "Still making entrances, I see. It's a little dramatic, don't you think? Stealing the moon. What are you, 500 years old? You should be past such tantrums." Nyxar flowed into the room, his movements unnaturally fluid. He picked up the carved badger from the table. Charming. The wood in his hand blackened and crumbled to dust. "I am not throwing a tantrum, my dear Morwenna. I am teaching a lesson. To your son. Corvin." Morwenna feigned indifference. "What has the boy done now? Forgotten to polish a helmet to your liking?" "He has insulted me," Nyxar hissed, the pleasant facade dropping for a second to reveal the infinite spite beneath. "Painted my likeness on a holy wall, being bested by some upstart seraph. It's unflattering." "From what I hear, it's a remarkable likeness," Morwenna said, taking a sip of her tea. "Perhaps you should consider the source of the insult. The church does tend to take a dim view of your kind." "I will have my revenge," Nyxar said, his eyes glowing like embers. "I will make him a laughingstock. I will twist his love for that moon-eyed girl into a torment. I will see him broken and begging." Morwenna sighed, as if dealing with a particularly tiresome child. "And what do you want from me?" "My blessing." "You won't get it. The boy may be a fool, but he's my fool. His starlight blood is worth a dozen of your petty curses." "I don't want your blessing," Nyxar said, leaning close. His breath smelled of cold stone and distant space. "I want you to stay out of my way. This is between him and me. Interfere, and I will not only destroy him, I will salt the earth of this entire village so nothing ever grows here again. I will make this place a byword for despair." He straightened up, his charming smile back in place. "But enough of such gloomy talk. It's Midwinter. A time for merrymaking. I believe I'll go and spread some cheer. Perhaps starting with the lovely Selena. A girl who loves the stars must be so lonely without the moon." And with a wink that held no mirth whatsoever, Nyxar dissolved into a swirl of shadow and was gone. Morwenna stood alone in her cottage. The brave front she had shown the demon evaporated, and a line of worry appeared on her brow. She walked to the fireplace and stared into the flames. "Oh, my boy," she whispered to the crackling logs. "What have you gotten yourself into?" She reached into a pouch at her belt and pulled out a handful of dried, silvery leaves. "Moon clover." She cast them into the fire. Instead of burning, they sparked and swirled in the flames, forming a tiny, shimmering image, Corvin, his face set with determination, packing a leather satchel in his forge. He was going on a journey. A foolish, noble, impossible journey. Morwenna nodded to herself. A mother's work was never done. She couldn't stop Nyxar directly, but there were other ways to help. Rules, even for demons, could be bent. She went to a locked chest in the corner of the room. The lock opened at her touch. Inside, nestled in folds of black velvet, was a small, plain-looking compass. But instead of pointing north, its needle, made of a sliver of crystal, quivered and spun, pointing towards the strongest source of magic nearby. She had stolen it from a navigator of the astral winds a lifetime ago. She tucked the compass into her dress. Then, she took a piece of the warm bread Borval had brought, wrapped it in a cloth, and slipped out into the unnatural night. She would not interfere. But leaving a gift for a traveling son, that was just being a good mother. The demon thought he was playing a game of vengeance. Morwenna knew better. It was a game of hearts. And her son's, for all its starlight, was terribly, vulnerably human. Corvin's forge was a cathedral of heat and industry, a pocket of defiant order in the chaotic dark. He moved with a focused urgency, the red glow of the banked coals painting his face in light and shadow. He was not packing for a trip to the next village. He was preparing for a journey into the storybooks, the kind with warnings scribbled in the margins. He filled a leather satchel with practical things, a water skin, a hunk of hard cheese, a coil of good rope. Then came the less practical items, a horseshoe forged during a solar eclipse, said to grant sure-footedness on uncertain paths, a nail made from cold iron, useful for discouraging certain types of fairy, and the silver rose he had made for Selena. Its captured starlight pulsed softly, a tiny, stubborn heartbeat in the dark. He could not give it to her, not yet, but he would carry its light as a promise. He slung his heavy blacksmith's hammer through a loop on his belt. It was a tool of making, not breaking, but he felt better with its familiar weight against his hip. Stepping out of the forge, the unnatural cold of the moonless night bit into him. The village was a tapestry of panic. Lanterns bobbed like frantic fireflies as people scurried between houses, their voices a cacophony of fear and speculation. He saw old Marta standing on her porch, ringing a handbell and shouting about the end of days. He saw a group of young men, emboldened by stolen ale, brandishing pokers and pitchforks at the slithering shadows, which seemed more amused than threatened. Corvin pulled his cloak tight and moved against the current of fear, his destination clear, Selena's house. He had to see her before he left. He had to let her know he was undertaking her impossible quest. Perhaps, in this strange night, she would see the seriousness in his eyes and not just the folly. Selena's house was on the edge of the village, where the garden met the wild. A light shone in her window, a single, brave candle flame. As he approached, he saw her silhouette against the pane, a portrait of lonely beauty that made his heart ache. He was about to knock when he heard voices from within. Not just Selena's, but another, a voice that was smooth, melodious, and set his teeth on edge. He peered through a gap in the shutters. Selena stood by the hearth, her arms crossed. She did not look afraid. She looked intrigued. And standing before her, making an elaborate bow, was Nyxar. The demon had shed his terrifying aspect for a more charming one. He was dressed like a nobleman from some distant, glamorous court, his clothes dark and elegant, his hair slicked back. In his hands, he held a shimmering, ethereal scarf woven from what looked like captured moonlight. A mere trifle, Nyxar was saying, his voice a honeyed trap. A trinket to remind you of the moon, since it seems to have misbehaved and hidden itself. A poor substitute for your own radiance, of course. Selena arched an eyebrow. You are very free with your compliments, sir. And how is it that you have moonlight to spare when the sky does not? A magician never reveals his secrets, Nyxar said with a dazzling smile. But for you, perhaps I might be persuaded. I am a lord of the night sky, my dear. This, he gestured vaguely upwards, this minor inconvenience is but a passing cloud. I can offer you more than pretty words and moondust scarves. I can show you the constellations from the inside. I can give you a necklace of dying stars. Corvin's blood ran cold. This was the source of the darkness, here, charming the woman he loved. He saw the flicker of temptation in Selena's eyes. She was a creature of wonder, and Nyxar was offering her the keys to the cosmos. Why would you offer me such things? Selena asked, her tone cautious but curious. Because you are wasted here, Nyxar said, sweeping a dismissive hand at the cozy, mortal room. Among these, simple folk. You are meant for palaces of cloud and spires of ice. Not for listening to the grunting of pigs and the gossip of villagers. He took a step closer. Come with me tonight. Leave this dull little world behind. For a terrifying second, Corvin thought she might say yes. The longing on her face was plain. Then she shook her head, a faint smile on her lips. You offer me the sky, but you ask me to abandon the earth. That seems a poor trade. And besides, I have a suitor. A blacksmith. He is off to fetch me a pair of boots." Nyxar threw back his head and laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "The boots. The Star Queen's boots. Oh, that is precious. My dear girl, the smith will be eaten by a grue before he finds the path to the celestial court. He is a man of iron and fire. The realms he must travel are made of dream stuff and old magic. He will fail. And then what will you have? A memory of a fool? Then his failure will be his answer," Selena said, her voice losing its playfulness. "And I will be free to consider other offers." The word struck Corvin like a physical blow. She was making his quest a test, a pass-or-fail examination of his worth. The stakes were his heart, and she was discussing them with a demon. Nyxar's smile was triumphant. "As you wish. I am a patient, Lord. I shall await the outcome of this delightful farce." He made another bow and, with a final, gleaming smile, dissolved into a swirl of shadow and was gone. Corvin stood frozen outside the window, his knuckles white where he gripped the windowsill. The romantic quest now felt like a grim sentence. He was not just trying to win her love, he was trying to save her from Nyxar's clutches. He was about to turn away, his spirit crushed, when the door creaked open. Selena stood there, wrapped in a shawl, her face illuminated by the candle she held. "I know you're out here, Corvin," she said, her voice softer than it had been with the demon. "I could feel you listening. It's rude to eavesdrop." He stepped out of the shadows, unable to meet her eyes. "I was coming to tell you I was leaving. And now you've heard that my favor is conditional," she said. There was no malice in her voice, only a strange sadness. "You think me cruel. I think you are as far above me as the stars," he mumbled, staring at his boots. "Oh, Corvin," she sighed. She reached out and touched his arm, a brief, electric contact. "It is not about being above or below. It is about being the same. That creature, he offers me pretty lies and empty wonders. I asked you for the boots not because I desire footwear, but because I need to know if your wonder is the same as mine. If your magic is strong enough to reach into my world." She looked up at the black, empty sky. "I feel the moon's absence like a lost limb, Corvin. It calls to a part of me I do not understand. If you can find the boots of the Star Queen, you will have navigated the realms that call to me. You will understand me. That is what I want. Not the boots. Understanding." Her words changed everything. The capricious demand became a plea for connection. The impossible task became a map to her soul. He looked at her then, truly looked at her. He saw not a distant, unattainable goddess, but a young woman, lonely and strange, trapped between a world she found mundane and a destiny she couldn't comprehend. "I will understand," he said, his voice firm now, filled with a newfound purpose. "Or I will fail trying." A genuine smile, small and bright, touched her lips. "Then good journey, blacksmith. May the starlight in your blood be your guide." He nodded, turned, and walked away from her light, into the swallowing darkness of the road that led out of the village. He did not look back. If he had, he would have seen the smile fade from Selena's face, replaced by a look of profound worry. She had set him on this path to prove his love, but watching him disappear into the unnatural night, she felt a cold dread that perhaps she had sent him to his doom. And high above, unseen, Nyxar watched from a perch of solidified shadow, his smile a predatory slit. The game was afoot. The pawn was moving. And the demon knew every trick of the board. The road out of the village was not a road at all, not anymore. It was a suggestion, a memory of a path that had been swallowed by the moonless dark. The familiar fence posts had become gnarled, watchful figures. The sighing of the wind through the pines sounded like whispered warnings. Corvin walked with the silver rose tucked inside his tunic, its faint starlight a tiny, private sun against his chest, pushing back the oppressive gloom just enough to see a few feet ahead. He had walked for what felt like hours, his breath pluming in the frigid air, when the trees began to change. The sturdy, sensible pines of home gave way to older, stranger trees. Their bark was pale as bone, and their branches, bare of leaves, twisted into intricate, unsettling patterns against the star-dusted void above. A faint, phosphorescent moss grew on their trunks, casting a sickly green light that did little to comfort. This was the Twisted Wood, a place spoken of in village tales to frighten children. It was said that the wood was a sieve between worlds, and that on nights when the barriers were thin, you could walk right out of your own reality and into another without even noticing. Corvin gripped the cold iron nail in his hand, its solidity a comfort. He was a man of substance, of hammer and anvil. This world of whispers and shifting shadows was alien to him. Every rustle in the undergrowth made him jump. Once, a pair of glowing amber eyes the size of saucers blinked at him from the darkness before vanishing. Another time, he heard beautiful, ethereal singing that seemed to promise warmth and safety, but when he took a step towards it, the silver rose against his chest flared with a sudden, warning coldness. He stopped, and the singing dissolved into spiteful, chittering laughter. He was being tested. Toyed with. He knew, with a certainty that settled in his bones, that this was Nyxar's doing. The demon would not simply let him journey unmolested. The path, or the memory of it, led him to a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a figure. For a heart-lifting moment, Corvin thought it was Selena. She had the same slender build, the same pale hair. But as he drew closer, the details resolved into something wrong. Her face was a little too long, her eyes a little too wide and vacant. She was dressed in shimmering silks that seemed to be woven from twilight itself. "Traveler," she said, her voice a hollow echo. "You are lost. The way ahead is perilous. But I can guide you. I know a shortcut." Corvin's starlight sense prickled. This was a trap. A lure. "I thank you," he said, his voice cautious. "But I will find my own way." The figure's pleasant smile did not change. "But the shortcut is so much faster. It leads straight to the court of the Queen of Stars. You seek her boots, do you not? I can take you there." It knew. Of course it knew. Nyxar's mockery was precise. "No," Corvin said, more firmly this time. He began to walk around the edge of the clearing, keeping his distance. the figure's head tilted to an impossible angle. "Why do you refuse my help? Do you not wish to please your beloved? She waits for you. She is so lonely." An image filled Corvin's mind, so vivid it was almost real. Selena, standing by her window, tears like frozen diamonds on her cheeks, her hand outstretched towards the darkness where he had disappeared. The longing in the image was a physical ache. The path this creature offered was so tempting. He clutched the silver rose. The real Selena had been worried, yes, but she had also been strong. She had not wept. She had challenged him. "You are not real," Corvin said, his voice grating. "You are a phantom made of shadows and lies." The figure's face rippled, like a reflection in disturbed water. For a second, it showed a glimpse of something scaly and furious beneath the illusion. "Foolish mortal. The path you choose leads only to despair. You will wander until you die of hunger and thirst, and your bones will be a testament to your stubbornness." The illusion shattered completely, revealing a gaunt, monstrous creature with long, grasping fingers and a mouth full of needle-like teeth. It hissed at him and lunged. Corvin didn't think. It was the instinct of a smith who has been startled by a spark. He swung the heavy cold iron nail in his hand. It was not a sword, but it was solid and true. It connected with the creature's arm with a sizzling sound, like meat dropped on a hot grill. The creature shrieked, a sound that was painfully high-pitched, and recoiled, clutching its wounded limb. It glared at him with pure hatred, then melted back into the shadows of the bone-white trees. Corvin stood panting, his heart hammering against his ribs. The encounter had lasted less than a minute, but he felt as drained as if he'd worked the bellows for a full day. He had faced his first real danger, and he had survived not by strength, but by trusting the truth in his heart and the tools of his trade. He looked down at the cold iron nail. It was humming faintly. As he watched, the humming intensified, and the nail began to tug ever so slightly in his hand, like a compass needle. It was pointing down the left-hand fork of a path he hadn't even noticed before. Nyxar's illusion had been meant to lead him astray, but his rejection of it, his affirmation of the real over the false, had somehow activated a deeper magic. The cold iron, a metal anathema to deception, was now guiding him true. A small, grim smile touched Corvin's lips. The demon thought he was just a simple blacksmith. But a blacksmith knows how to shape things. He knows how to temper strength. He knows that even the hardest metal can be made to bend, if you apply the right heat and the right pressure. He followed the pull of the nail, leaving the clearing and its malevolent memories behind. The woods grew denser, the phosphorescent moss casting longer, more distorted shadows. But Corvin walked with a new confidence. He had faced a phantom and won. He had a guide. He did not know how far he had to go, or what other horrors Nyxar would conjure. But he knew that every step, no matter how frightening, was a step closer to understanding Selena. And that was a fire no darkness could extinguish. The pull of the cold iron nail led Corvin deeper into the twisted wood, where the air grew thick and sweet with the scent of rotting blossoms and the ground beneath his feet became soft and spongy. The bone-white trees were now draped with vines that trembled as he passed, as if sharing secrets about the mortal intruder. The path was no path at all, merely a direction indicated by the faint, insistent hum in his palm. After a time, it could have been an hour or a day, for time had become as soft and uncertain as the ground, the trees thinned abruptly. The nail gave one last, strong tug and fell silent. Corvin found himself standing at the edge of a vast, frozen marsh. The ice was not clear, but a murky, smoky gray, and beneath its surface, he could see shapes moving, slow, ponderous, and vast. The sky above was still devoid of moon, but here the stars were brighter, sharper, as if he were closer to them. And there, in the very center of the frozen waste, stood a market. It was not a market of stalls and awnings. It was a market of possibilities. Floating spheres of light bobbed in the air, each containing a vendor and their wares. One sphere held a woman with hair like spun sugar, selling bottles that contained miniature, raging storms. Another held a tiny, wizened creature bartering with a fox over the price of a single, perfect moment of silence. Corvin saw a cart piled high with discarded dreams, slightly used and sold at a discount, and a booth where a man with a clockwork face sold kisses that were guaranteed to make you forget your own name. This was the Midwinter market, a crossroads for beings from a dozen different realms, a place that only existed on this one night, in the liminal space created by the moon's absence. The air buzzed with 100 different languages, the clink of strange coins, and the low hum of potent magic. Corvin's heart sank. How could he possibly find the boots of the Star Queen in this chaos? He was a man of iron and fire, this was a place of gossamer and whim. He stepped onto the ice. It held his weight, but it groaned ominously with every step. The vendors paid him little mind, a mortal was unusual, but not unheard of on a night like this. He wandered through the floating spheres, feeling more out of place than ever. He passed a sphere where a beautiful, melancholic creature was trading locks of her hair for tears of true sorrow. Her eyes met his, and she looked away, bored. He needed information. He needed to find someone who knew the ways of the celestial courts. Spotting a sphere that seemed slightly more substantial than the others, inhabited by an old woman stirring a pot over a blue flame, he approached. She had a kind face, wrinkled like a baked apple, and she smelled of cinnamon and grave dust. "Grandmother," Corvin said, his voice hesitant. "I seek a pair of boots. They belong to the Queen of the Stars." The old woman stopped stirring and looked at him. Her eyes were milky white, but he had the distinct impression she could see right through him. "Do you now?" she cackled. "And what does a smith of earth and ember want with such things? To clank about the palace and scuff the nebulae?" "They are for a lady," Corvin said. "Ah, a lady." The old woman nodded sagely. "It's always for a lady." "Well, you won't find them here, boy. The Star Queen does not trade at markets. Her treasures are guarded by more than locks and keys." She peered closer at him. "But you have a light in you. A starlight. Faint, but true. That is your currency here. Not the clinking metals in your pouch." "My starlight?" Corvin asked, bewildered. "A story," the woman said, leaning forward. "A memory touched by starlight. That is what the denizens of this market crave. They feed on the essence of mortal experience. Trade a memory for a clue. That is the way. Corvin hesitated. His memories were his own. What would it mean to give one away? But the thought of Selena, and the mocking smile of Nyxar, steeled him. Very well. I have a memory. He closed his eyes and thought back. He did not choose a grand memory, or a sad one. He chose a simple one, the first time he had ever successfully forged a piece on his own. A simple hook for his mother's cooking pot. He remembered the heat on his face, the satisfying ping of the hammer, the pride that swelled in his chest when Morwenna had taken it, grunted in approval, and used it that very night. It was a memory of creation, of becoming. As he focused, he felt a strange sensation, a gentle pulling at the core of his mind. A wisp of silver light, like a fragment of a dream, drifted from his forehead and into the old woman's waiting hand. She popped it into her mouth like a sweetmeat. She hummed, her milky eyes glowing faintly. The pride of making. A good vintage. She pointed a bony finger across the market. See the sphere that looks like a soap bubble, filled with shifting colors? The being inside is a weaver of dawn. She knows the paths to the higher realms. She might help you. For a price. Corvin thanked her and made his way towards the iridescent sphere. As he walked, he felt a strange emptiness where the memory had been. The hook was still on his mother's pot, he knew that, but the visceral feeling of that first success was gone, leaving only the dry fact behind. The Weaver of Dawn was a creature of breathtaking beauty and terrifying fragility. She seemed to be made of light and spun glass, her form constantly shifting through the colors of the early morning sky. Mortal, she said, her voice the sound of sunlight striking dew. You have the scent of ambition about you. What do you weave? I seek the boots of the Star Queen, Corvin said, feeling foolish. The weaver's form solidified for a moment into a woman of coral and gold. A bold pattern. The path is not walked. It is danced. On the rings of Saturn, through the dust of nebulae. The boots are not a thing to be stolen. They are a gift, earned. How? Corvin asked, desperation creeping into his voice. The Queen values courage, the weaver said. But not the courage of the battlefield. The courage of the heart. To earn an audience, you must present a gift that proves you understand the nature of things. A thing of great value, freely given. What kind of gift? That, said the weaver, is for you to discover. But be warned, the demon of the stolen moon watches you. His shadow lies heavy on your path. He will offer you a shortcut. A deception. Do not take it. As if on cue, a new sphere coalesced beside the weavers. Inside stood Nyxar, looking resplendent in robes of deepest black, embroidered with stolen constellations. In his hands, he held a pair of boots. They were exquisite, seemingly crafted from the night sky itself, with soles that shimmered like galaxies and buckles that glinted like distant suns. Why bother with all this, Smith? Nyxar's voice was smooth, seductive. The weaver speaks in riddles. I offer you a solution. Here they are. The boots you seek. A simple trade. Give me the starlight in your blood, all of it, and they are yours. You can return to your beloved a hero before the night is through. It was a devastatingly attractive offer. End the journey now. Win Selena's hand. The boots in Nyxar's hands looked more real than anything Corvin had ever seen. He looked at the boots. Then he looked at Nyxar's smiling, treacherous face. He remembered the weaver's words. A deception. The Star Queen's boots are earned, not traded, Corvin said, his voice low but firm. And I will not bargain with the thief who blackened the sky. Nyxar's smile vanished. The illusion of the boots flickered and dissolved into wisps of shadow. Then continue your futile quest, fool, he spat. Your starlight will be mine eventually. I will simply enjoy watching you suffer for it first. His sphere popped like a bubble, and he was gone. The Weaver of Dawn nodded, a hint of approval in her luminous eyes. You have passed the first true test. The path ahead lies across the frozen marsh. But know this, the ice is thin, and what lies beneath is hungry. Tread carefully, maker of things. Your journey has only just begun. She offered him no further help, and her spear drifted away, melting into the kaleidoscopic chaos of the market. Corvin was alone again. But he had a direction. And he had something even more valuable, the knowledge that the true challenge was not one of distance, but of worth. He had to find a gift for a queen. And he had to cross a marsh that hid ancient hungers. He tightened his grip on his hammer and walked towards the far edge of the market, where the ice stretched out, dark and treacherous, under the cold, watchful stars. Leaving the chaotic glow of the Midwinter market behind was like stepping from a noisy tavern into a silent tomb. The ice of the frozen marsh groaned a low, constant complaint under Corvin's boots. The air, which had been thick with magic and chatter, was now still and bitterly cold. The only light came from the hard, bright stars above and the faint, determined pulse of the silver rose against his heart. The Weaver of Dawn's warning echoed in his mind. The ice is thin, and what lies beneath is hungry. He could feel it. The ice was not a solid sheet, but a fragile skin over deep, black water. With every cautious step, he heard crack spiderweb beneath him, freezing back together almost instantly. And below, in the impenetrable darkness, large, slow shapes circled.